set in a magical setting. The Spine of Night is a 2021 adult dark fantasy horror that makes for a refreshing release in the animated film genre. Directed by Philip Gellert and Morgan Galen King, it takes us on a journey with a wild, magical plant known as Bloom, as it changes the lives of everyone in its path. The movie is famously known for its rotoscope animation style, as it intertwines different narratives and incidents that take place over the course of centuries. With a fantastic voice acting cast including Richard Grant and Lucy Lawless, The Spine of Night truly touched the audience's heart with its eye-catching animation and gripping storyline, and today we'll explore this gem of a movie in great detail. Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin. Following the journey of this magical plant, exploring the movie's plot. Kicking off in a snow-clad mountain range, the opening scene introduces us to a scantily clad woman who we later come to know as the Witch Queen Zod. She braves the cold weather and finally arrives at the peak, where many monuments suggest that the place might be home to some strange force of nature. Soon enough, she makes her way to a giant skull and enters it through its mouth to finally arrive at the location of the mystic flower, Bloom. Instinctively, Zod examines the flower closely, and her actions catch the eye of the flower's guardian, who rises from the shadows to talk to her. He tells her that the flower is the last light of the gods and that she shouldn't dare to seek it, while Zod assures him that her intentions are not evil. She further tells him that Bloom is weakening over time, and he takes offense over the fact that she was trying to teach him. She then shows him an identical flower and claims that her people had come across it when one of the flower's seeds flew all the way to their native land ages ago. As Zod makes a case for herself, we learn that she embarked on quite a painful adventure to find him, and that her only regret is that it took her so long to finally find him. The Guardian then asks her all about the world underneath the mountains, and Zod tells him about her home in the great jungle swamp of Bustal. As the movie takes us to Bustal, we see an old flashback of Zod leading the people of Bustal as they worship the fire and pay their respects. As the prayer intensifies, several invaders sneak around the forest and shoot arrows at the devotees. While their leader orders them to kill all the men except for Zod, our witchy protagonist bravely stands up to the violence and takes down a few opponents on her own. Sadly, she is eventually overpowered by Lord Pyrantin's tyrannical forces led by Mongrel, who chain her up and take her to their fortress. Zod fiercely resists her capture and even spits on her captors, but these actions don't faze Mongrel as he continues to drag her to their lord's fortress. While they move ahead, a scholar named Gal Sur also makes his way to Pyrantin's mighty city under the pretense of studying his rise to power. As he faces Pyrantin, Gal Sur apologizes for the delay in his arrival, and the ruler then tells him that he's arrived just in time for their breakthrough. He asks Gal Sur to take a seat and then brings Zod into the room despite her protests. Pyrantin tries to insult her and the swamp of Bustal, and even declares that he's going to wreak havoc in the swamp and take what he wants from its depths. While he drones on, Mongrel tells him about the blue flames that Zod conjured in the forest and orders her to demonstrate these powers again. In the hopes that they would let her go if she cooperates, Zod succumbs and uses another flower petal to conjure a flame that takes the shape of birds, crowns, and skulls before finally injuring Pyrantin. While his face is engulfed in blue flames, Mongrel comes at Zod, but Gal Sur intervenes and shields her from any incoming attacks. This action costs both of them their freedom, as Mongrel throws them in prison before heading back to Pyrantin. Meanwhile, Gal Sur's injuries start affecting him on a fatal level, and Zod comes to his rescue by chewing on a bloom petal and then using it to heal him. They soon start conversing, but are interrupted by Pyrantin, who shows up to their cell to inform Zod that he destroyed the swamps of Bustal. As Zod rushes to the prison window, she watches her homeland burn up in flames and tears up, while Gal Sur consoles her and stays by her side. He empowers her to break free, and the two of them manage to escape the prison by blasting the walls with Bloom's fire. Gal Sur suggests it would be safer for them to escape, but Zod fiercely faces Pyrantin and uses her powers to drown him. After escaping the prison with Gal Sur, Zod sees him as an ally, but he soon betrays her trust and stabs her in the gut. As she falls to her death in the swamp, Gal Sur snatches her fur coat full of bloom petals and runs away with this mystical flower. His ambition to rule the world overtakes him, and he soon returns to his other scholars in Senoth, who arrest him for his crimes. As the story returns to the present, the Guardian wonders how Zod is standing before him if she was swallowed by the Great Swamp ages ago. She then continues with the story and tells him all about Faye Agura, a rebel who entered the Fortress of Scholars and suggested that they must distribute their knowledge to the common masses. At the time, the local civilians were protesting against the scholars' greed for knowledge, and Faye Agura arrived in the city amid great chaos. She hands several magical books to one of the scholars, who has a hard time interpreting the texts. He eventually visits Galsur in his prison, who uses his evil tricks to convince them to perform a ghastly ritual. This ritual was supposed to unleash more of Bloom's power, a moment that marked Galsur's rise as a ruler. While he stayed within a cell and chanted spells, several scholars fell under his control and unleashed a massacre upon the city of Sennar. Fate Agura initially ended up falling for this spell, but she snapped out of it after killing one person and switched over to the rebel side. Meanwhile, the bloodshed strengthened Galsur's ritual, and his literal body tore into two to reveal a giant eye within his torso. He rose as a supreme being powered by the magic of the bloom and soon slaughtered the other scholars so that he could be the only one bestowed with divine knowledge. While the Guardian learned all about Galsur's actions, he feels like he failed the world and refuses to hear any more about it. However, Zod continues her tale and tells him about the rebel forces that grew stronger and plotted to overthrow Galsur. Several years down the line, the trio of rebels opposed Galsur fiercely and ended up burning his entire store of the bloom. Now that he'd lost a major chunk of his power, Galsur was considerably weaker but still determined to take over the world. However, he didn't anticipate that the past would come back to haunt him, and he most certainly didn't expect Zod to return to life. As it turned out, the last few traces of the bloom somehow fluttered across the lands and made their way to Zod's corpse. With the power of the flower, Zod returned to life and immediately found herself being driven toward the snow-clad mountains to find the Guardian. Once again, we return to the present as the Guardian processes the kind of loss and destruction that has taken place among humans. He then tells Zod about Bloom and the giant skull that was supposedly the head of the last god. While this god was killed by humans, there was another mightier god above him whose severed head created the universe that we live in. Along with this sacrifice, these gods created the bloom, a mystical flower that would communicate the knowledge of the universe to only those who could bear the burden of knowing it. Over the years, several beings had assumed the role of the Guardian, and Zod only met the most recent one. All these Guardians had different journeys, but most of them sought the flower on their own and learned all of its secrets, even if the knowledge was unbearable. In this way, the Guardians did a brave job of defending the flower, even if it meant that they had to bear a tremendous burden upon their shoulders. After dedicating their life to defending the flower, they'd eventually get tired and pass down the responsibility to the next person seeking its knowledge. As the story unfolds, we learn that the current Guardian was actually the one who had breathed across the bloom and spread its seeds over to the swamps of Bustal, among other places. With the finale fast approaching, Zod decides to lure Galsur to Bloom's resting spot on top of these snowy peaks. She bravely faces his forces, even though they end up fatally wounding her, and eventually uses all her powers to resurrect the bodies of every past Guardian. While Galsur could use his army to massacre civilians, they fall quickly at the hands of these ancient Guardians, while Zod has the pleasure of killing Galsur. While she finally brings an end to his tyranny, she does it at the cost of her life, as the power of her attack drains her of her life and incinerates her. In a beautiful climax scene, Zod's skull spins out and reaches the stars, while we see several bloom seeds scatter all around the world once again. All the main characters that added to the film's charm. While the movie weaves quite a lot of different stories together, Zod, Galsur, the Guardian, Lord Pyranton and Fate Agura might be the main characters that drive the plot. Zod, voiced by Lucy Lawless. Zod is an ancient swamp witch who's connected to the magical mysteries of the natural world. In fact, her scantily clad attire is also supposedly a sign of her connection with nature, as she leads the people of Bustal with her magical prowess. She also serves as a narrator, as her experiences and flashbacks help us weave a meaningful story out of all the characters' encounters with Bloom. Zod is quite a determined young woman who often imparts useful wisdom and even aids Fate Agura in her journey against opponent forces. With some help from the Bloom, Zod gains access to a lot of forbidden knowledge and then applies it to protect her people against enemy forces who seem intent on abusing the flower's magic. Her wisdom and determination to protect the swamp is quite commendable, and Lucy Lawless truly does a wonderful job of voicing this feisty character. The Guardian, introduced as the wise guardian of the bloom. This character was voiced by none other than the legendary Richard Grant. He promptly stayed at his position at the top of the snow-clad mountains and fiercely protected the bloom from any invaders. Several beings assumed the role of the Guardian over the years, and they were bestowed with all the terrible dark secrets of the universe upon being in touch with the bloom. Galsur, voiced by Jordan Douglas Smith. Galsur started out his journey as a scholar, but eventually descended into madness over his obsession with bloom. At the start, he worked with Zod and endured several hardships together, but over time he turned into a tyrannical ruler who abused the flower's powers to dominate others. Galsur has quite an interesting story arc, especially since he starts in prison with Zod and eventually ends up switching over to the same dark side that had previously troubled him. Fate Agura, voiced by Betty Gabriel. Fate Agura was one of the protagonists of the film, as she courageously led the resistance against the tyrannical rulers. While she initially worked with the scholars, Fate Agura wasn't blinded by their schemes, and she knew when it was time to fight against their tyranny. She did her best to gather an army of rebels, and didn't back down even when the opposition had the power of the bloom on their side. What were the main themes of the movie? Primarily centered around the dark fantasy genre, The Spine of Night explores several themes ranging from the victory of good over evil to mystical themes rooted in old folklore. As we learn about this magical flower that was the remnant of godhood on Earth, the movie highlights the power that comes with the responsibility of looking after such a powerful artifact. Most beings in the movie end up going down a path of corruption due to their association with Bloom, and the movie does a beautiful job of portraying one's descent into madness and tyranny as they rise in power. Along the same lines, the movie explores how one's obsession with gaining knowledge over the secrets of the world might lead one to do terrible things through Galsur's story arc. In a somewhat cliché manner, the movie gives a typical message of the triumph of good over evil as Zod eventually manages to defeat Galsur. Of course, this comes at the price of her own life, and Zod's heroism and willingness to sacrifice herself for her people also seems to be one of the main themes around which the story takes form. Exploring the film's animation, a true visual treat for all animation fans. While The Spine of Night has a solid plot, the movie initially caught the audience's attention due to its rotoscopic animation style. In the visual media, rotoscoping involves manually creating a matte or a silhouette of the elements that will then be translated into a live-action form. In this way, these mattes can be composited over different backgrounds, which is done by using a chroma key. Chroma key essentially serves as an easy way of replacing the background against which our recurring elements appear, and this technique saves a bunch of time in post-production. The Spine of Night uses this technique to perfectly capture its adult horror theme, with complete hand-drawn rotoscope animation work done by Gellert and King. They sought inspiration from Frank Frazetta and Ralph Bakshi's Fire and Ice, and hand-drew most of the main elements such as Zod, the Guardian, and Galsur, among other characters. These drawings are sketched over live-action footage on a computer at a rate of 12 frames per second, giving it a retro-futuristic feel. The footage might appear a bit crude and relatively less realistic than other animation styles, but it was surely a refreshing touch to the film, and it appeased the viewers to a great extent. Marvelous verdicts. What do fans and critics think about this film? Bringing together elements such as horror, fantasy, and adult animation, The Spine of Night is a truly fascinating watch. One of its best things is the way it effortlessly blends all these concepts, making for a seamless watching experience without overwhelming the audience with too many things going on at once. The movie's rotoscopic animation undeniably takes the cake for captivating the audiences, and a stellar cast including Richard Grant and Lucy Lawless does a wonderful job of breathing life into the animated characters. The movie takes us across several historical periods and locations, ranging from the swamps of Bustal to the fortress of Pyrantin and the city of Skolas. All these places interconnect with the help of the Bloom Flower, but they all tell a different story that later comes together as Zod narrates the tale to the Guardian. The movie has excellent story writing, keeps viewers on the edge of their seats as they journey across time and place, with Zod's narration playing in the background. Penned down by Philip Gellert and Morgan Galen King, the storyline does have a bunch of mature content, with the protagonist mostly wandering around half naked, but this doesn't take away from the richness of the plot. The movie beautifully blends magic and good witchcraft, revolving around serving nature with opposing forces of malevolence that try to abuse this power, making it a gripping tale. To wrap things up, The Spine of Night is truly a masterpiece among other animation films that were released in recent times. With a famous voice acting cast, stellar visuals, and a refreshing animation style, this movie ticks off all the boxes for an adult horror fantasy, and we hope you give it a watch. And if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one, and be safe. Thanks everyone.